We are back with episode 2 of the IFL Dynasty Fantasy Football League, where we're going to be chronicling everything throughout the season, from rosters right now to start sit questions and trades, and analyzing everything as the season progresses. But right now, we are going to talk about ratings of these rosters after our draft. We've had 8 people rate each roster, short term and long term. And then we have a combined overall rating, which is the order that we're going in. So we're going in from 12th to 1st. We're going to do 4 teams each week for the next 3 weeks. The first roster is Cyber Sleuth's Brian Doughton, RotoHeat team member, and he takes a unique approach to this auction draft. Bryce, he's got a 3.93 overall rating. He got a 1.71 for short term and a 6.14 for long term. So what do you think about this roster as it stands today and for the future?
Well, obviously, as it stands today, it has no chance in hell to be any good this upcoming season. I think he's got like 3 players on his entire roster that you would probably feel somewhat comfortable starting, and that's when Kyler Murray ends up getting healthy. He took this unique approach of selling all of his all of his free agent budget during that draft to acquire picks for the upcoming 2024 class and a little bit in the 2025 class as well. So he's going to have, I believe, half that draft, if not 5 picks in the first round, with majority of the picks in the second round as well. So he's going to be stacked with youth in the upcoming seasons. And the staple players that he did add were Justin Jefferson and Kyler Murray. Everybody else is kind of a toss-up, which is why he has that short-term grade of a 1.6 or something, or whatever it was. It was by far the lowest. But he had a decent long-term grade with all these rookie players that he's going to have in the future, along with Justin Jefferson as a solid piece to build around. So it's not a strategy I would take personally, because you need a lot of these rookies to hit in the upcoming draft. So I maybe would have sold. I wouldn't be opposed to selling money during the draft, but maybe not over half my budget. I would have probably liked to do maybe try and get maybe 2 or 3 picks in the upcoming draft, and grab more players that for sure are going to be decent players for the upcoming future, where now he's got to hope to hit in the upcoming rookie draft. So what were your ratings on?
Yeah, so, I rated him a 1 in the short term, just like basically everybody did. We did have one person from the league that was super nice to everybody and gave him a 5. That was the lowest. So they were just super nice to everybody, giving 7s, 8s, and 9s on all the rosters and whatnot. But and then I gave him a 5 for long term. And the reason why I give him a 5 is because there are different ways that you can go. I feel like if you just use the picks, you're setting yourself up for failure. There's a lot of risk involved with that, because a lot of guys miss, even with high picks. So you're taking on a lot of risk if that's what you're doing. Now, if he trades some and acquires some other youth and whatnot, instead of drafting all of those, then this could easily go up to a 7 or 8 and be sitting in a real good spot. But there's just no way that you're going to hit on all the picks. It's very, very, very low chance of doing that. But he also has Justin Jefferson, who he can get a load back for. He can get, 3 good starters for Justin Jefferson in the right trade. So he's got options, but, he's got to hit and he's got to make good trades to really fill this roster out. Now, that's my only qualm with it. I'm the same as you. I wouldn't go this extreme if I'm going youth, but, if he does hit on a majority of them, makes a couple good trades, then this roster could turn around fairly quickly.
I agree.
Next up, the Hypnotoads. Jay Felicio, for all of you that don't know, Jay is from Front Yard Fantasy and a great fantasy analyst. You should follow him on Twitter. But he got a overall score of 5.47, which was tied with the next person up. But I gave him a 6 in the short and a 5 in the long term. And Bryce, you gave him a 6 in the short term and a 6 in the long term. How you feeling about the Hypnotoads?
I think this was a well-balanced roster. He spent a lot of money early in the draft on really 3 players, that being Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson and Jamar Chase. But I think he did really well later in the draft, budgeting and getting some players that I think could help him here now. Potentially be a playoff team. But I still like that youth that he has moving forward with the quarterbacks and the stud wide receiver. I mean, he got Jahan Dotson, he got Brandon Ayuk, he got some running backs that might be serviceable, especially in this deeper starting lineup. He's got some. He probably his biggest thing is his tight ends. He's a little bit struggling on, but he's got some guys here I don't mind. I don't think he traded away any of his picks in the future. I think he's one of the people that the Cyber Sleuths didn't get a hold of. So he has the foundation of being able to draft some rookies this upcoming season. But I don't really like his overall roster when it comes to all 12 players. But it's like the players that he does have are guys that I was also targeting in this draft, which is kind of why I gave him more of a balanced score, a little bit probably higher than his overall rating. What were the reasons maybe you gave him a lower on his short term, right? No, his long term. You gave him a little bit lower than I did with a 5. But did you also think he had more of a balanced roster moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, for me, obviously having Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, and Jamar Chase is great. I love that. A quarter of your roster, you're ready to plug them in, and they can make up for the deficiencies at the bottom of the starting lineup, right? They can cover a lot of that ground. He's got some players in the middle that should be pretty solid with, Brandon Ayuk, as you mentioned. I think Jahan Dotson can take another step. I agree. He needs Mike Gesicki to really pan out in New England to help him at the tight end spot. But you only got to start one at each of these positions. So he can make some stuff work. But, it'd be nice for him if Jeffrey Wilson gets a decent amount of carries, stays healthy. It looked like Kenny McIntosh might have got some action because all the running backs in Seattle are dying already. But now he's hurt. So there's a lot of ways this one can go. And that's where the long term I gave a slightly lower grade. But, I do like Greg Dortch as well. I think he's going to get a lot of targets in Arizona. We've seen him do real well with Hopkins out and when Hollywood was out last year. So I think he's going to be all right for him as one of those bottom of the roster guys, but needs a couple of these to pan out. Needs Logan Thomas. That would be a big if he could bounce back to where he was a couple years ago. And then he just needs Mac Jones to hold that job as well. He can use that as a trade chip if he needs to get a running back or a wide receiver. I think that's fine. As we've talked, you might not have to start 2 in this league, depending on your roster. He will, absolutely. But that third one, if you're only going to use them 2 weeks a year, you're only going to use them 2 weeks a year. If Jones starts off hot, I would be looking to trade him and move into a wide receiver or running back from a team that is looking for that second quarterback. Next up, Dark Seed. Overall, Dark Seed got a 5.47 rating. He was a 4.88 on the short term, but a 7 on the long term. A lot of youth on this roster. I gave him a 5 in the short term and a 7 in the long term. You gave him a 3 in the short and an 8 in the long term. So what was it about Dark Seed's roster that you didn't like for now and you like for later?
The only thing I didn't like for now is just how much youth he has. I mean, he's got a lot of players that have a lot of upside moving forward, but I just don't know how I feel about him, right now. The quarterback position with Anthony Richardson and Bryce Young, I don't expect them to maybe be super productive their first year. I think they're going to be figuring out the NFL, and I could see them being good pieces moving forward. But I expect them to have your kind of typical rookie season to where they're just not producing at a very, very high level. But which is why I gave him such a high grade long term. I like the running back department he's got with Breece Hall, Najee Harris, and Kenneth Walker. But again, Breece Hall's coming off an ACL tear. Kenneth Walker's already been banged up, and the addition of Zach Charbonnet is going to eat into some of his touches, would I predict. But again, these are guys I might like in a couple more years more than I like them right now. The wide receiver department, he kind of went a little bit more of a mixed route. He got some cheaper youth with guys like Christian Watson and Trey Burks. And Marquise Brown kind of still on the younger side, but also got some veteran guys that could be productive this year with Odell Beckham Jr., Brandon Cooks, Alan Lazard. Kind of salvaged his long-term value for me just a little bit. And I really like at the tight end position with Dalton Kincaid, Chigo Konkwu and Pat Freiermuth. I think potentially all three of those guys could be guys you could start in these lineups with the 1.75 PPR premium. I just don't see this roster competing this upcoming season unless he's got a lot of these young guys really making that leap this year, or really outperforming what rookies typically do. But he's probably one of my favorite long-term lineups moving forward as well. So what are your thoughts on this strategy of him really just drafting all rookie young guys with just a couple of veterans sprinkled in there?
Yeah, I think that, if the veteran wide receivers and Najee and Brees Hall do well, this roster could compete this year. It's a tall task. You don't have to get $1 million out of your quarterbacks if you've got enough quality starters, and he's got depth there. If it doesn't go right, then he's going to be able to flip the Brandon Cooks. The Alan Lazard may have some value. Odell Beckham may have some value to competing teams this year. Same Robert Woods. Who knows what's going to happen with him? A little bit older, but could have some value, second round value or something, to a competing team during the season. So he set himself up to really have some success with being able to flip some veterans. You see it in baseball all the time, right? They bring in veteran on a 1-year deal, and then if they're not in the race, they trade them. And that's kind of where he's at with this roster. He's got some good youth, and then he's got some veterans that he might be able to trade at the deadline this year to bring in some more youth for the future. So I'm with you. I don't think that he's going to be in the playoff contention. If everything bounces right, it definitely could be, because he's got the 3 running backs that could get a lot of points. He's got 3 veteran wide receivers that could get a lot of points. And if some other stuff falls right, Dalton Kincaid actually being a good first-year tight end, then his roster could at least be pesky, right? And if he can weather the first half of the season while the rookies kind of get games under their belts, he could be real dangerous in the second half. And even if he's not in contention, he could be a pain in our ass if we are in contention.
We interrupt this program to bring you breaking news from the Intergalactic Football League. The Rebel scum have acquired quarterback Justin Herbert in exchange for QB Russell Wilson and wide receiver DK Metcalf. I send you back to Rick and Bryce for a breakdown of the first player exchange in IFL history.
Wow, what a big trade so early in this league, right after the draft. Bryce, why don't you give us just a little bit of your thoughts on this deal?
Looks like Terminators had a little bit of mismanaging of his budget in the draft and tried to address it right after by trading away Justin Herbert to the Rebel scum for Russell Wilson and DK Metcalf, giving himself a little bit more depth in his starting lineup.
All right, we are going to get in depth on that next week when we talk about the Terminators team. But right now, we're going to get back to the juggernauts, Joe Kidder. Bryce, what do you think about Joe's team?
Joe kind of went a strategy similar to the Hypnotoads, or at least that's how it panned out. I don't know if they went in with that strategy, but he kind of got a core group of guys. He spent a lot of money on the quarterback position. Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and CJ Stroud took over, I believe, over 60% of his budget with those 3 players. So we'll see how that pans out. You can only start 2 quarterbacks. So obviously that gives them a lot of trade leverage moving forward to maybe some people who didn't get some quarterbacks to pan out for him. But again, I think just like the Hypnotoads, we saw him do really well later in the draft, day 3, day 4, getting some players that I really do like when it comes to youth. George Pickens for the wide receiver for Pittsburgh's making some plays in training camp, but that's what he's been known to do. Zay Flowers, who in my opinion was the second best wide receiver in this draft class, along with Jordan Addison, who most people would put at number 2. And then he surrounded himself with some low-key running backs like Brian Robinson and Khalil Herbert that I think could be sneaky good value. So I really like what he did with his lineup. He's got a core group of 3 players moving forward with the quarterbacks. and some nice depth position when it comes to youth at the other positions.
So let me ask you this, Bryce. He got a 5.64 for overall. That was with a 5.14 on the short term and a 6.57 on the long term. I gave him a 7 short. You gave him a 5 in the short term. And then I gave him a 6 and you gave him a 7 in the long term. So do you agree with these ratings that he got from our league mates?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like I was kind of pretty close to the average in both the short and long, being a 5, yet being that 5 and that 7. So it seems like I had the similar opinion of the consensus when it came to, how he approached the draft and how it ended for him.
Yeah, and that's my thought, is that there is wasted budget at the quarterback position. Like you said, you've got, one guy. CJ Stroud has to be really, really, really freaking good to not start, or to start more than 2 weeks a year. Because you just got probably 2 of the top 3 quarterbacks in the league. You're not sitting Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. Now, what that does do is gives him a lot of trade leverage, like you said, where he could trade Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes and get a heap in that trade to fill out his roster a little bit better. Running back looks pretty rough, because I think Chicago, the longer camp has went on, the more Donta Foreman has been involved, not only as a rusher, but as a pass catcher as well. Plus, Roschon Johnson just got back. So we don't know the near or long term for Herbert. Obviously Penny, when he's on the field, good. Brian Robinson, not going to catch a lot of passes. James Robinson there for a minute was looking kind of good when Saquon we weren't sure if he was going to play. And then Deuce Vaughn literally looks like my nephew out there in Dallas practices. And my nephew's 7, and it's crazy watching him. But you're right. At wide receiver, Addison and Flowers for the rookies, it's going to take a little while for them to pick up. George Pickens, I think, is going to be inconsistent, but he's going to have big splash games. And I mean, we saw that camp catch that he made, and he can make those, but I don't know how consistent he's going to be. But I think that this team does have a decent shot at competing, because you've got those 2 quarterbacks at the top. If you decide to, he's not going to trade CJ Stroud, right? He is like Ohio State fandom. I thought, I put Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow out there, the first 2 nominations, because I thought I was going to get him to blow his budget. And, so he's probably going to end up moving Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen. That would be the smart thing to do. Or CJ Stroud, but we know he's not doing that. But you don't need all 3 of those guys. You just don't. And you can fill out. Dalton Schultz, probably going to get a lot of targets for Houston. Nice little, if you do trade Mahomes or Allen, you got that nice little stack there. And then you've got, Nico Collins, who's looked pretty good. So he's got some very interesting pieces. I just think you got to trade one of those quarterbacks and fill out a couple more spots, because, just like we talked earlier, I can't remember which quarterback we were talking about, but you can probably get 3 pretty solid players for either Allen or Mahomes.
You're talking about Justin Jefferson when you said that.
Oh, Justin Jefferson. Yep.
Right.
But he's up there too, right? So you're going to be able to get some ammo there if you find the right trade, if people are looking for it. That's the other thing about this draft. If you went that route to get extra value somewhere to trade later, we don't even know how this is all going to pan out because of the scoring and just the way the roster, the starting lineups are set. We don't know how it's all going to pan out. So tight ends could end up being the number one asset to have, with the tight end bonus for first downs and the 1.75 PPR. So it's very interesting. I didn't go in here and be bitter because, we're rivals, because we're Cubs. I'm a Cubs fan. He's a Reds fan. So he gave me a 2 on my short term. We'll talk about that in a later episode, but yeah, it's gonna be a fun rivalry. You guys are gonna have a lot of fun watching the Rick and Joe back and forth in this league and on these videos throughout the season. It's gonna be fun. That's it for this episode. Bryce, thank you, and we'll be back next week.